Gotta click on all those too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we're live. 5, 5, 5, 5. It's all the way 5. Yes, we are live. It's 12:28. And it's Turbo Tuesday. That's what I should have put. We need to make that. Turbo Tuesday. Turbo shipping out of the richardholderperformance.com. Jimmy's making that all of that happen, so that's good stuff. But I got some interesting comments on the video that I posted today. If you guys haven't taken a look, please take a look at the video. I posted a comparison between, it's two of the turbos that we tested while we were doing a lot of testing, and the two that I tested the last time that I went down. It's the GTX 3584 RS, which is the smaller of the turbos that we're offering. And then the larger one is that G42 1200 or 120, something like that. It's about a 1200 horsepower turbo. What we have is like an 800 horsepower turbo and a 1200 horsepower turbo. And the reason that I break it down like that is because people should choose their turbos accordingly. You should pick your turbo for the power output that you want. That should be the first thing. If somebody says, what turbo should I use? I've got a 6-liter and I've got this cam and this intake manifold. My question is always the same thing. Because they could have that combination. They could have a 6-liter or a 4.8 or a 5.3, and they could want to make 500 at the tire. They just want to double what's there. Okay, they got a stock one that makes 230, and they want to make 500 or 250, and they want to make 500. Okay, that's great. The turbo that we pick for that is completely different than one where they want to make 1,000 or 1,500 or whatever their number is. Even though the engine combination is the same, the vehicle could be the same, the engine could be the same, but their desire is going to dictate like what turbo they select. And that's why I have two of them. We could have more than that. I honestly just don't want to have a whole bunch of different turbos. And I'm not going to be a turbo company. There are lots of good guys. Like I said, Robert at Force Performance is good. There are lots of good, turbo guys out there. Virino, VS Racing, I shout out to all those guys. I've used their stuff in the past and it works good. And I got nothing but good things to say about them. The reason that I wanted to have turbos for sale is because more often than not, I'll do testing on something. We'll put a turbo on something. Back in the day, it used to be a GT45, but we'll put a turbo on something and run it. And I'll get lots of comments where people say, I want that turbo. I want that exact turbo. Okay, well, I'm not really sure what exactly that turbo is because we just got it, on sale on eBay or wherever on Amazon. And so it's a lot easier for me to have the turbos that I test available immediately. So somebody says, hey, look, I want that turbo. Okay, good. Right here in a box. Just take this turbo, put it on, and it will do what the one that we just tested did. Makes it easy. And also, like I said, I'm not going to put anything up there that we don't test. So we're going to test all of this stuff and make sure that it works. We've tested, we tested recently when Jimmy was out here. We tested one of the damper pullers. It was just a total failure. And so we're like, hey, we don't want this. We're not offering this. There's no way that we would sell this to anybody because it's junk and it doesn't work. And so we wanted to try these different turbos and find out. And honestly, we could pick other turbos probably that could also do this. There are some that, does one spool 100 RPM quicker than the other or whatever. We could go through all that. That's not necessary. I just wanted ones when we set the goals up for these. I wanted one that was going to be more than 1,000 horsepower, and that's a pretty easy thing to get. And also for this other one, the requirements were a little bit more stringent because we wanted something that could do GT45 power and be more responsive. And if it could do more than GT45 power, I think we hit a home run on this GTX 3584 RS turbo. I think that's a good combination. And one of the things that we're going to get, and Jimmy and I talked about this going in, we're like, it's going to happen. That this small of a turbo, it's going to be exactly like the thing that I had to overcome with all of this cam stuff. Well, you can run any cam with a turbo. Oh no. I mean, the people, the cam people and the people that they talk to, the people out there in internet land resisted when I first introduced this notion that every cam is a turbo cam. And they also resisted the notion when I first did the Big Bang. They're like, oh, that's all BS. You can't run that much boost on a stock one with, you got to have forged rods, you got to have forged pistons, you got to have a billet crank or what all. I'm like, no, you don't have to have any of that. This is real. This happened not just once now. It happened 5 or 6 or 8 times now. So we know that it does that. Just like with turbo cams. If you just pick a cam and run a turbo on it, it's a turbo cam. All the factory ones, all of the truck cams, all of the stage 1 through stage 18 cam, all of those cams. And so when we're looking at turbos, pick the turbo. The first thing that you need to decide is the power output. How much power do I want to make? Leave yourself a little bit of room. That's why I wanted a turbo on the bigger side that would go past 1,000 horsepower. Quite honestly, 1,000 seems to be the number for most people. But then you get the people that want 1,000 at the tire, and then so you got to have a little bit extra, and then guys can make a little bit more, whatever. And quite honestly, I'm not interested as much really going beyond that, because as you go up in power past that, once you start going way into the 4-digit stuff, you run into all kinds of problems. And the biggest problem being, hey, have you looked at what a transmission costs for a motor that makes 1,500 horsepower? No. Well, you're not going to get it with a turbo 350 and a shift kit. That's not going to work. You need a transmission that might be as much or more expensive than the engine that you just put together. Because quite honestly, it's pretty easy to make that amount of power. In any sort of decent, we've been using that low buck truck camshaft in all this testing, because it's in the motor. It's more convenience than anything else. But we know that camshaft, whatever, even a smaller camshaft, doesn't dictate what kind of power we can make. The turbo does that. So pick the turbo for the power output that you want. And then when I was having a conversation with somebody earlier, pick the camshaft for what you want the motor to do out of boost. Forget about the boost part of it. That boost part of it's going to take care of itself. So how much power do you want your NA motor to make? What kind of idle do you want it to have? What kind of drivability? All that stuff. Pick it for that. And then when you add boost to that, like always, good things will happen. But the thing that Jimmy and I were talking about on this when we were running the smaller turbo, and like I said, they're fighting this too, is that, that turbo's too small, it has too much back pressure. Well, it made 800 horsepower. So, and also, a lot of these guys have never looked at back pressure versus boost pressure. And they're also not realizing that the back pressure is only 2-to-1 at the top of the RPM range. It's not 2-to-1. It's only 1.1-to-1 down at the bottom of the RPM range, because that's how back pressure works. And I remember having a guy argue with me about that. He said, well, that back pressure is not like that. If you have 2-to-1, if you have twice as much back pressure as you have boost pressure, you have that everywhere. And I said, no, that's not how it works. Even if you have 15 pounds of boost, let's say at 3,000 RPM, you don't have 30 pounds of back pressure, even if you have a 2-to-1 eventually at the top of the RPM range. And here's why. I had to sit him down and let him understand. I said, okay, how much power is your motor making at 3,000 RPM? And how much power is your motor making at 6,000 RPM? It's not the same, right? One of them is a lot higher. So if one of them is making a lot more power and the size of the turbo remains constant, the hot side of the turbo remains constant through the whole thing, and you're now trying to shove more exhaust through it, what happens to the back pressure? Oh, yeah, that's right. I said, yeah. Now, instead of, if you made, let's say you were making 400 at 3,000 and you're making 600 at 6,000, you have that much more. You have, what's that, 50% more or something. So you have a lot more exhaust flowing, trying to make its way past the turbo. And so you have more back pressure. You have a rising back pressure curve. That's what happens. I mean, it has happened on every time that I've tested this. Now, you can get a big enough turbo where you have less back pressure than boost pressure, or the same, or slightly more, or sometimes what happens is when you have the turbo size, you'll get a crossover point where it's making less back pressure than boost pressure, and then it's making the same, and then it's making a little more. And so that happens also. You can have, depending on how you size the turbo, what the turbo is and what the NA power output of the motor is, you can have any of those combinations. And what people get wrapped up in, and guys that start knowing a little bit about turbos, they get wrapped up in this fact, oh, you can't have too much back pressure. That's bad. Well, every factory turbo setup that you've ever run, that you've ever driven in, is going to have probably 2-to-1 boost pressure to back pressure, because that's how they get it to be responsive. They don't care about the fact that it will ultimately limit power. They're doing that already. And that's the thing. You will be limiting power. But if you want to go from, like, let's say this GTX 3584 has 2-to-1 boost pressure to back pressure at the top of the RPM range. Let's say you wanted back pressure to be less. If we put that G42 on there, it makes less back pressure, and it'll ultimately make more power, but it won't be nearly as responsive. If you what I said to this guy is, hey, look, if we did a roll on with these two turbos at, like, let's say 600 at the tire, and we did a roll on in top gear or whatever, I said the G42 turbo car would never catch the other car. The other one would be up on boost immediately, and it would just motor away. And even if the other one, like, could make more power at the same boost or whatever, it's just never going to catch it, because that's how response works. If you race them, drag race them, and put them on the two-step and had converter and all that stuff, where one of them makes 100 horsepower more than the other, it's pretty predictable what's going to happen. But that's not what's happening out in, in the real world, wherever this real world is. That's not what's happening. That's not what guys want. And a guy that wants 600 horsepower or 500 horsepower or 400 horsepower at the tire or whatever, he needs a smaller turbo than the 1,000 or 1,100 horsepower, G42 turbo. He's going to be much happier with that, because he's going to be able to nail the throttle, and he's going to have immediate boost, and the big smile is going to come across his face, and who's ever on the passenger side is going to be hooting and hollering, yeah, boost, this is awesome. That's what it's going to be like. They're not going to know that, oh, I could have made more power because I had a lower back pressure, but I would have had less response. All of that is the trade-off that's inherent in this thing. This is the trade-off that's inherent in, I'm not going to say every turbo situation, but almost every turbo situation. I mean, we got not lucky, but they got redesigned turbos that allowed us to do something with a smaller turbo that was both more responsive and made more power than the turbo that we were comparing it to. But we were comparing it to a 20-year-old turbo, and it might even be older than that. So that wasn't very hard. But the point is, pick the turbo for your power output. And then if you want to do things with exhaust housing size, the AR change is not going to make a big change in response rate. People seem to think that too. Oh, well, if I put a tighter AR in, I'll have all the boost response of the 3584, but all the power of the G42. No, that's not going to happen. You'll get a little bit more response from the turbo that you have, but again, you're going to be trading something. And when you do that, if you put a tighter AR on there, guess what happens? You got more back pressure, because that's what always happens. That's our trade-off. That's like the camshaft. We put a smaller cam on, we got more low-speed power, but I want the bigger cam. Yeah, then you're going to have less low-speed power, but you're going to have more power on the top. The answer is obviously VTEC. Everyone needs to have VTEC. Darren. Let's do a poll. Let's do some pollage. Okay, should you run a different cam? Listen, should you run a different cam with a turbo that has high back pressure versus low back pressure? So do you need to cam it accordingly, according to the amount of back pressure that the turbo has? Should you get rid of all that overlap? Lunchbox, what's going on? Scottish, watch the video. Good morning from Australia. Adam, Aussie. Out there staying away from the King Browns. You're the Ellis Godfather. Responded to both. Richard, can you please run twin? What do you want us to run twins on? And just out of curiosity, what do you think that's going to happen that's different? Twins will support 1,600 horsepower. Theoretically. I'm in that club with the old Mercedes M104s on stock 722 transmissions. We target 400 wheel horsepower. You can throw a giant turbo on there, and the wastegate is just open 60% of the time. So are you torque limiting it because of the transmission problem? Killer prices on the turbos. Yeah, I'm trying to sell stuff so that the average guy can, do it. And that's good. And turbos are amazing now because they're back before when we were wanting to do turbos before all of this stuff exploded. Doing a turbo was really, really cost prohibitive. Now it's a great time to be alive. Need a fake screen name, chatbot to tell us stuff like what brand the junk puller was, so we can't buy it. Oh, I can ask Jimmy. Well, I'll definitely put that out. I don't know who made it. It was a piece that we tried from China, I think. My Turbo 400 cost me $5,500, and the converter was rated for 1,500 horsepower. Yeah, see, that's not cheap. We're not all baller status like Lunchbox. Daily driver F-150 302 stock with gap rings, aftermarket aluminum heads, 9-to-1 twin GT25s with red line under 5,000 E85. Any data on that setup? I've never run twin GT25s on anything. Are those? You have GT25s. Are those going to be internal wastegated? A lot of that small stuff is. Doing okay today, just dealing with a headache. Is carb being closed down? I haven't heard anything like that. Will you include smaller turbos in your catalog in the future? Probably not. I don't know why I would want to go any smaller than that GTX 3584 RS. Most of my stuff is V8s, and that turbo actually, and I should mention that's a really good turbo for like Honda applications. For a single turbo on a D series, I think I would get something a little smaller. But on a B series, on a K series, certainly that's a really good turbo for a K series. 17.2 liters S478 T696 132 blowing into a 106 millimeter G57. So is this a diesel thing that you're doing, like a compound diesel thing? It's only a few hundred RPM more for G42. It's not crazy lag. It's less lag than an S475. Are you talking about the difference between KE? What is the difference that you're talking about? The few hundred RPM between a G42 and the GT3584 is not accurate. So I wonder which one you're talking about. Generally speaking, let's see. I'm scrolling. Bob, I have a G27. Can't find any information on it. Bed mount with a 2.5-inch inlet to heat exhaust directly after the turbo. 2.5-inch dump out the factory location. I've never heard of a G27. Is that new? Turbos work just like cams regarding airflow. 2000 Sonoma stock 4.3 5-speed 0411 swap. And then what kind of power are you trying to make, Bob? So the G42 will spool a little better on a 6-liter than did a 5.3. Yes. Yeah, the bigger motor is going to make more low-speed power, and that's going to have more exhaust energy to the turbo. But and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about that I forgot to talk about, so I'll mention it real quick, is that some people who don't really understand engine dynos were making comments that, oh, the G42 is spooled just as fast as when I showed the comparison between the two, or one made 100 horsepower more than the other one, or 130 horsepower more than the other one. They're like, but the G42 is better everywhere. I'm like, yeah, it was better everywhere because it makes more power, because it has more flow rate and it has less back pressure. But what you're seeing is not response rate. You're seeing a stationary load at 3,300 RPM where both turbos are fully lit up. And so everything is there. You don't see that on the street or on the track. It doesn't do that because you don't have I mean, I guess if you power braked it or had a stall converter and you were, or you're two-stepping it, that kind of stuff can happen at the drag strip, but it's not something that is an indicator on what the thing would do out while you're driving around. The GTX 3584 had full boost at 32% TPS on the roll-in. The G42 was like at 100 kPa. So it was much less. So the response rate between the two would be dramatic. I'm considering putting 4 electric turbos and dual intake setup on my 5.3. Okay. I don't know how. I'm curious how you're going to have the power to do all of that. What is your power source for that? 6 liter. I want 700 to 1,000 horsepower to the wheel. Summit Stage 2 cam installed. Yeah, that G42 is the turbo that you want. The nice thing about the G42 also, V-band flange. So initially I was kind of against V-bands, but after putting them on, like this is so much easier when we're doing turbo swaps. And you can orient the turbo, you can spin it and make it mount the way that you want. It's really kind of nice. Have you experimented with electrics? Are you talking about electric turbos? I haven't. So do you have kits? We don't do kits for specific chassis, just the turbos. Turbos and injectors and wastegates should be there soon. Generally speaking, high LSA isn't good for boosted cars. I think generalized statements like that are not accurate. They work very well if that's what the guy wants. Does the guy want to have like a really, really smooth idle? The wide LSA will get him that, like an LS9 cam. It's not the cam I would pick, but it might be the one that guy wants. That's why there's no best cam, is because that's wholly subjective. Is this Turbo Week? It is Turbo Week. And so the video that I'm working on now is Project Side Piece. I wanted to call it Side Chick, although I didn't know if that was too much. But Project Side Piece, where we run the turbo off of one side of the motor, but also comparing a log style manifold to a header, a tubular header style, because in an instance where it's wholly dependent on the response rate of the turbo, that we need to see what's going on there. And obviously we don't have enough exhaust flow to energize the turbo like we do when we have both sides feeding it. And so it shows more of a difference. It's really pretty cool. I'm new to the Boosted Club. Can you make a couple 30-minute to 1-hour videos installing turbos? Are you talking about installing a turbo kit? We have videos up where we've installed the turbo setup that we run on the dyno, but I'm not doing turbo installs on vehicles because we don't offer that, and I'm not going to do that. L33 GT 3582 LS valve springs. Okay, that one's a little smaller, but it will work. Turbo March Madness. Today's Turbo Tuesday. Opinion on NK Performance winning Eric Weingarter's Cam Challenge. I don't know what you mean. The second time that Eric did the test, there were different results. But my hat's off to everybody that participated in that. That's a hard thing to do, and I think everybody shares this opinion that if you have one, well, we won't go into that. Your turbos are insane good prices. Would be a cool thing to see T3 turbos as well. I don't think we're going to do any T3s, only because I don't know how much smaller I would. Well, we could do 3076s or something like that, maybe. But I just think that the more that we go away from these two turbos, that the smaller like the market becomes. Like I said, I don't want to have a whole bunch of them in stock. We want to have, like, if we just have two cams, 2 turbos, man, it all seems to work pretty good. Around a single S488 on a pretty stock 5.3. That's a big turbo, and that's a big hot side. Is it a T6? Let's see. Scrolling. Out of curiosity, what are your thoughts about feeding a turbocharger into a supercharger as a two-stage boost setup? What supercharger are you talking about? So I have videos up where we've taken turbos and we do a compound setup where we run a positive displacement supercharger and feed turbos into that supercharger. So those videos are already up. We've done that a bunch. I'm thinking twin GT28s on my Northstar engine, even though I've been told to go bigger. You'll be happier with more response more than you will be the bigger turbos. And after you put the smaller ones on, you go, oh, okay, I've done, this is awesome. This is awesome. You know what I want is I want more power. And then you put bigger ones on. Can you go into detail on your break-in procedure on a rebuilt engine and do a first start on a 383 LS? The way that we do it on the engine dyno is if we put a new motor on, we first of all prime it to make sure that it has oil pressure, so that we have no spark plugs in it. And on an LS specifically, we do this differently on a small block Chevy or whatever. We just spin, or a Ford, we just take the distributor out and spin the oil pump and pump oil up into everything for the small blocks and big blocks, the typical stuff. And we just make sure that we have oil coming out of all of the push rods, all the rockers. And once we have that, then we will go ahead and try to start it. Like on a carbureted small block, it starts right up. On the LS stuff, we do it differently. We still prime the setup. We make sure that the pump had oil in it. And we put 5 quarts in or whatever the pan holds. And then what we do is cap everything off and pressurize the crankcase. And we pressurize the crankcase till we see like 1 or 2 PSI on the gauge. And what that's doing is pushing oil up into the pickup and into the pump. And then we spin it over with the starter with no plugs in it, so it spins over fast. And then we have oil pressure almost immediately. It catches pretty quickly until we see oil pressure on the gauge. And normally we will see like 40 or 45 pounds of oil pressure. And we let it spin there for, a few seconds anyways, just to hopefully get oil up in everywhere. And then we put everything back together, take off all the caps that we put in stuff. And then we start it. And if there are new rings, then we run it through break-in procedures. And so the break-in procedures are computer controlled things where we cycle it between, like, let's say 2,500 and 3,500 RPM. And the load may vary from 50 foot-pounds to 100 foot-pounds. And then it holds it down at 1 RPM and then releases it and brings it back up to the other RPM and holds it there for a certain period of time. And so it's a computer controlled cycling, and we could choose how many times it does that and for how long it does that. And usually we subject it to 2 15-minute segments for the break-in. And then after that, it's ready to run. There's no breaking in on a camshaft for a LS because it's hydraulic roller. So that's not the problem. We're just giving some a little bit of time for the rings to seat. Your Silver State Mustang setup with a Vortec was a manual. It's a 5-speed. What for 70 mods for 500 horsepower versus 800 horsepower? I don't know about the transmission mods because I'm not a transmission guy. You have to talk to the transmission guys about that. Twin turbos on a Northstar. L33, 3582. Seen your video on the RS. Tell me, Richard, how much more it flows. Was looking at getting a 7070 billet or 7875, looking for 500, 600 wheel horsepower through a turbo 400. The GTX 3584 RS will definitely do 600 wheel horsepower on that combination. That's the turbo that I would pick because I think it would be the most responsive one. If eventually you're going to go more than that, then I would pick a suitable turbo that makes more than that. Viren 7875, the Gen 2 stuff or the next gen stuff is much more powerful. So that will take you into 4-digit stuff like this G42 is a good choice for that if you want to get and make even more power. If you want to be responsive, I don't know what intake you're using, but a mild cam, smaller cam like our low buck truck camshaft, the long runner factory truck intake or Trailblazer SS is good for that, for having more response rate. Currently have a 55 Chevy, aluminum heads, roller cam 383, 4,500 stall. Wow. 410 Caltrac, 1660 foot. I want to run a 2006 LQ9 with an 80E. I want to swap what turbo. So Jimmy, again, you got to tell me how much power you want, because you can make 500 to 1,000 or 1,500 depending on which turbo you want. Doing a front wheel hub on my 06 Silverado with Richard in the background. 70 degrees. That is awesome. Just being out in the sun is great. In fact, when I get off here, I'm gonna go take the dogs for a run. 4R70s don't live at 500 horsepower. Heat exchanger G27 is my best assumption. I cannot find any information about it. Seemingly a Garrett. I'm looking to hold 5 to 7 psi. Just having fun without blowing up too many before the 6-liter. Yeah, I don't know anything about a G27 turbo. Anyone here in Northwest Indiana or close that fixes cracked wheels? Is it a cracked like aluminum wheel? I'm new to the turbo stuff. I'm running a Stroker 426 Hemi and an SRT8 Jeep. Like to put twins on it. I have 2 PSR 74 millimeter turbos. I drag race. Would that be good with no lagging? I don't know about those turbos, but that should work pretty good on a 274. Should work pretty good on a 426. But if you're drag racing, you're going to have to you're lucky in that you can do the things on the line that drag racers do. So you can two-step it. I don't know what transit is. You can put it on a converter. You can put it on a two-step. You can do, other anti-lag things. So I mentioned I got a crank from a 6.2. Scrolling. Only had 4,500 miles on it. Seems kind of odd. It's new. It's a new engine, but lately I've been hearing that 6.2s have been blowing up even with 4 miles on them. Are you talking about the LTs on the 6.2s? Because I heard those were having problems, but not the LS stuff. I need an intake recommendation as I don't have one for my Recport 823s. Just bought a G42 6-liter with a truck cam. Yeah, what is your hood limitation, Scott? Do you have hood clearance issues? Does it got to be a low intake manifold? And like what kind of RPM range do you want? You just don't want to deal with exhaust manifold bolts. Yeah, we've done our share of welding on those. I have a 369 small block Ford, CS Racing 7875 Gen 2.5. Oh, VS Racing, I'm sure I was going to say. Made 823 on a chassis dyno. The turbo hot side is 96 on CO2 control, and on 15 pounds gate, it made 13 psi manifold. Do you think changing the hot side? You have 2 of those or just one of those? I think that Gen 2.5 is 1,000 horsepower turbo. Richard wants stuff that makes power. Richard, a higher LSA means both valves are open at the same time. Wouldn't you blow the charge right out the exhaust valve? No, that's not how it works. A higher LSA, 120 LSA, would have less overlap than a 110 or a 106 LSA. More of a street car, 6-liter G42 will be laggy on the street. Again, it depends. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on the size of the motor and what you determine laggy is, what the converter is. There's a lot of stuff. A G42 is less responsive than the smaller turbo is. So first thing, pick the turbo for what kind of power output you want. The G42 is a good turbo. It's a really good 1,000 horsepower turbo. It's not as good as the other one for 500 horsepower, for 600 horsepower. So if you're stuck in the middle there somewhere. I'm being selfish with a T3. I know I'd just rather buy from you. Getaway, I have some T3s that you might be interested in. I don't know what kind of power you want to make. Yeah, Mr. C has it backwards, Utah. You're right. Are the new truck cams you have better than the sloppy best cam? The low buck truck cam is smaller than that. In your opinion, is it worth purchasing the newer technology G Series Garrett clones over a GTX model turbo? I don't know how to answer that because I don't know what you're trying to achieve. Is it if one of them is a little better? I don't know how much better it is, and I don't know where you're at in needing the better part of it. Let's say that it makes I don't know. Let's pick a number. Let's say it makes 50 more horsepower instead of 1,000. It makes 1,050. Are you at a point where you're needing that? If that's the case. Oh, and Mr. C, also a tighter LSA all by itself doesn't necessarily guarantee overlap because the other valve events come into play there. And also overlap is not bad for a turbo application. The boost doesn't sneak out because here's something to think about. This will spin you around, right round, baby. If the back pressure is higher than the boost pressure, why is the boost pressure going to sneak out? It's not going to. That doesn't happen. Planning on putting my truck's L96 into my Chevy 2. Chevy 2's awesome. I'm concerned about the tires hooking up under so much power with such a small Chevy 2. Any ideas on the rear end gearing to minimize tire fry? Yeah, you could put like 273s or 240s or something in it. But then you'd be loading a turbo. If you had a turbo on it, you'd be loading that even more. But if you're worried about spinning the tires, you can always not go to full throttle. Oh, Vern, are you talking about the poll question? You would fix the back pressure instead of changing the cam, or not worry about it. David, oh, you're using the G42? Okay. Yeah, you're going to make a lot of power. And you're going to spin the tires. You're going to be able to spin the tires, but you just don't go to wide open throttle. You just don't nail the throttle on the line. You think 1.4 Ecotech could spool a 6466 built and make 500 wheel horsepower if the turbo is rated for 600? If it's rated for 600, 500 at the wheel is going to be like maxing it out. I think that motor can. I don't know where in the RPM range it's going to be. And is anything done to that motor? A 1.4 making 500 at the tire is definitely going to be laggy. I just bought a remanufactured 460 for $300. Nice. Took it apart. Everything's perfect. It's never been started. What's the biggest cam I put in it for now and then upgrade the heads later? I have no idea because I have no idea what pistons you have. I have no idea what heads you have. I don't know what your piston to valve clearance is. And putting the biggest cam in that you can fit is almost never my recommendation. I would be more interested in you saying, hey, I want to make 350 horsepower with this thing, or 400, or whatever the number is. And I want it to idle nice. I want it to drive. I want it to get good mileage, or I don't want it to do any of that. I just want it to chop and be cantankerous and, whatever the thing is. Then we'll decide on what camshaft you could put in. Because I have no idea what the piston valve clearance is. I don't know nothing about the valves that you have. I mean, the valve reliefs that you have in the pistons. I don't know any of that. You'd have to measure that if you want to put big cams in it. It'll be getting dyno tested soon, but I'm guessing I'll have 500-ish horsepower at the crank out of a 383 LS. My compression is 10.5 to 1. I'd like to have 700 horsepower. What turbo do you recommend? $500 at the crank out of 383. I think that's kind of right in between. And you want 700 horsepower? I don't know. Are you ever going to want to go up in power? I would pick the 42 for that because I think you're going to want more than that. The turbo back pressure affect your Big Bang test at all? Like, would be able to make more power? We had less back pressure than boost pressure on the Big Bang motors because we had two big turbos on it. They were oversized for what we were doing. So back pressure wasn't an issue. And we were looking for the strength limit of internal components. So back pressure wouldn't ever even come into play. Oh, 17-inch Koenig wheels. Yeah, those are nice. Get some photosynthesis out of the sun. What do you think about crankshaft polishing? I think I think lots of people do it. We don't ever do it on the junkyard motors that we have. What's the difference in running a 600 spring versus a 660 spring on a boosted application if they have the same cam? Well, the amount of lift that the spring will allow doesn't come into play unless you're changing the cam. More than likely, a 660 spring is going to have more pressure, and so that may or may not be beneficial with boost. What I wouldn't do though is run a 550 lift cam and run a 660 spring on it. You want the spring to be closer to coil bind than that. Scott, flathead 85 El Camino. So you're going to need a lower profile manifold. I was going to say we have a one that I would sell you for next to nothing. We have an LY6, a new intake manifold that we bought that we thought was a Trailblazer SS, but turned out not to be. But it's 4 rec port heads. The time between intake valves opening up gives you the degree of the rotation to build more boost in the intake so you can have more power on the far end of the track. The time between intake valves opening gives you the degree of the rotation to build more boost in the intake so you can have more power at the far end of the track. That's not making sense to me. Is it worth port matching an air gap to Victor Jr. heads on a Ford? I haven't found port matching to do anything. I haven't seen that actually make power, but if it makes you feel better, yes. If the intake is smaller than the head, I wouldn't worry about it. If it's the other way around, I'd be more apt to do it. T6, it's laggy, but I leave on the trans brake every time, so it's never been an issue. Yeah, if you're drag racing and you can use all the anti-lag stuff to get by with that, converters and two steps and things like that, it's not as much of an issue. That's never the turbo, obviously, that I would recommend for somebody to use on the street. But if you're wanting lots of turbo and you can utilize all of it and get past the response rate thing because it's a drag race deal. Love my 20 MSR Stealth, old school 5-spoke. Is advancing the stock HO cam 4 degrees hurt piston to valve clearance dramatically? It's not going to do it dramatically because you probably have a lot of piston to valve clearance built into that camshaft. I don't think it's going to change it, but I don't think it's going to get you close. Looking for a bit more bottom end, still concerned. I don't know that you're necessarily going to get more bottom end by doing that. Sometimes that doesn't work, but you could try it. But I don't think you have a piston to valve issue. Just one single 7875 and seems to be having back pressure issues. We turned up the gate to 25 PSI and boost went to 15, and that's it. Are you monitoring back pressure? I mean, it's pretty easy to measure to see what it is. What motor is this on? Because a single 7875 trying to run 25 pounds on it, I don't think it's going to do that. I mean, 15 pounds on a 500 horsepower 6-liter is going to max out that turbo. Picked up an L92, looking to put a BTR Stage 4 LS3 cam in it. Texas Speed heads. Super Victor and a carb. How do you think it would compare to your 7700 L33? Well, it's obviously going to make more power because it's a lot bigger. I think a 750 carb is going to be holding you back on that. Crankcase out of a 2025 Denali. Oh, so you're doing a LT motor than Charlie Brown Gaming, right? That's an LT motor. Is there a limit in boost when using low quality 87 gas, or can tuning fix that in a stock 2 valve? Yeah, you're not going to be able to run much boost on 87 octane. And if you are trying to run boost on 87 octane, you're going to be taking all of the timing out of it. I had a Vortec T trim on it, making 15 pounds and making 660, switched to VS Racing, and I made 14 to 15 PSI and 823. Yeah, it's that seems odd that there would be that much of a difference. I mean, I know that having tested Vortex and versus turbos, it's making 823 at the tire. So yeah, you're getting up near the maximum of the turbo. I would look at, I don't know what the hot side is, but I would look and see how much back pressure you have. Is it a difference in performance running twins or a single turbo directly from the intake versus? I don't know what you mean by running it directly from the intake versus the heads. All of the exhaust for whether you have a single or a twin turbo are going to come from the cylinder heads. They're going to come from the exhaust ports of the heads. So I don't know what you're talking about the intake. 3584 on a 6-liter. How much power do the wheels can it make? Trailblazer SS, Summit Stage 2 cam. That's probably not the turbo that I would pick for that application. I think I would pick a bigger turbo for that. But I'm thinking it would make 650 or something at the tire, probably. Ecotech making 500 at the crank. I just wondered if the trans will stand it. Yeah, that's always a question. What do you think about crankshaft polishing? That's not your question. Your question is something else. So you need to tell me about what you're talking about. Tell me what motor this is and why. What did you do to it? Why are you thinking about polishing the crankshaft? Is this polishing versus non-polishing? What are you trying to get done here? Scrolling back here. I answered some question, but I want to see what it was. Okay, yeah. Yeah, the 460, I just don't know, Jay. I don't know what the piston to valve would be. New G series uses a MAR M, a higher temperature that flows a little better map, responds. If you're not racing the car, I wouldn't worry about it. Richard should have 100 thumbs ups. I have 100 people, 109, but only 45 thumbs ups because, you know, thumbs ups are so hard to give and they're so costly. How do you determine the best safe timing with boost and on pump 93? A knock sensor is a really good way to do that. Are you making videos with turbos that didn't make the cut? I can talk about them. We sold 3 of them. We sold the S369, the 6670, and the 7675. I think it was the other one. All those are good turbos, and we would use them. I just like these the best. The intake you have wouldn't fit under stock hood. I don't think that the LY6 would. It's a truck intake manifold, Scott. So I don't think that a Recport truck from the yard. That's what I have. I just have a brand new one, and I'll sell it to you as cheap as you would be able to get one from a wrecking yard, because we just want to get rid of it. We thought it was a Trailblazer SS, but it's not. I just don't know if it will fit under that hood or not. I don't know if a truck manifold will. If you have the motor in there, you could set some sort of truck manifold on there and see. LC9, L92. Okay. Ian, did you tell me that you're running Recport heads on your LC9? Because you're not doing that. Let's see. Okay. BTR. Oh, stage 4 LS3 cam. Texas Speed CNC ported heads. Okay. Super Victor carb. I don't know. I don't know how well those heads compare to what we have. What we have is really good. The cam's good. Super Victor should make pretty good peak power, I think. Would using methanol on a compressed air supercharger system get too cold to combust? I don't know. I don't know. That'd be a good question for those guys. Somebody would have to try that. I know that when we were my only experience with methanol was when I was helping Mahovitz run his methanol blower thing, the modular Ford. And if the water temperature was too cold, it didn't want to combust. Got better numbers in card with me, Gen 3 6-liter forged crank, standard stroke, 30 overbore, stock head gaskets, and stock 243 cathedral heads. Rods look like stock and assuming flat top pistons. Are you asking how you get 12.3 to 1 compression? Because that stuff that you're saying right there won't do it. Are you asking what piston that you would need to make 12 to 1 compression? Does the GTX make too cool turbo-y noises? Yes, it is full of turbo-y goodness. And not only that, it's full of turbo-y goodness and billet-y goodness. So it has like a lot going for it. Hot size 96. And get a 125 hour, you think help back pressure? Do you think I'm out of turbo? I think you're probably almost out of both. You might be out of hot side first, but a 7875 turbo is going to be like 1,000 horsepower turbo, I think. How long has your website been up? I didn't even know about it until today. I don't know, a few months maybe. Cam is net lift 621, 607. The lift and tells me nothing about that. You need to tell me what the duration is at 50. And Shane, what were you doing with that? Oh, okay. Yeah, but the cam's not going to tell me anything about the static compression that you're asking about, though. Have you done a carb conversion test on a Ford 4.6? Yes, I have videos up where we ran a bunch of carbureted ones on modular Fords. But I haven't ever run an Edelbrock dedicated carbureted intake on there. We have run the Sullivan one before on stuff, but not the Edelbrock ones for a 2-valve. Going to come down from wanting 1,000 horsepower, 500 to 700-ish will work. Shane, are you running a turbo on that? I think I might have asked this once before, but do you know what's the stock factory size, turbo size on a Chrysler 2.2 Turbo 1? It's a little Garrett, but I'd have to go back and look it up and see what it is. 12.3 to 1 and the cam octane for daily driver. Shane, how are you getting that compression? 4150 flange intake versus a 4500 intake on a boosted LS. Is there any benefit for having a bigger intake on a boosted application? I don't know. I've never tried that. There definitely was a benefit on the NA stuff. I'm thinking that will continue on the boosted stuff, but I don't know because when we test a boosted throttle body, you don't really get very much or anything at all. And I don't know if the manifold is more than just a flow thing. I don't have an answer to that. Richard, do you have any experience using bottled compressed air for boosting an engine? I saw someone. Yes, they ran compressed air supercharging at Westech while I was there. Jeff Smith did a big story on it, and it works very, very well. I already calculated 12.3 on compression calculator. So Shane, is yours a 6-liter? If it's a 6-liter and you have a stock stroke and you have a flat top piston, you don't have 12.3 to 1. All this high turbo horsepower need valve upgrades. What material looking at? We run factory valves on all this stuff. You could do an Inconel exhaust valve if you're running it under load for a sustained period of time. I know I shouldn't, but the G42 would look good on LY6. It really, really does look good. And two of them would look even better, right? Not 823, 243, 238, both at 50. No turbo. Would you rather have duration over lift? My 823 horsepower has 544 intake, 538 exhaust, and duration is 280. Is the 280, 288? Is that the duration at 50? If it is, those are big cams. Semi compression calculator. Shane, a 4030 6-liter with a stock stroke and a 65cc combustion chamber is not 12 to 1. You put something in there incorrect. I know this off subject, but in your opinion, what's the best engine for a Crown Vic? For a Crown Vic with the one that's in it with boost? What's your opinion roughly is the max power you can do on a junkyard turbo build with pure 93 pump gas? I don't know. I don't ever try to do that on pump gas. Yeah, those are big cams. Those are really big cams. If you look at what Tom Nelson does on pump gas, he usually does big motors. They're like 427s and stuff, but you can do 1,000 horsepower on pump gas. You just have to have a really good motor to start out with. It's got to be low compression, probably has a big cam, has a short runner intake manifold, has a really good management system on it, has knock sensors on it, and then you run the boost up and has good intercooling. But from a junkyard thing, you're not gonna get there. Crown Vic, how's our poll doing? Should you run a different cam with a turbo that has high back pressure versus low back pressure? 62% saying no. I would really like to see I'd like to learn more about that. I think the answer is yes. And also I'd like to see the knock counts, the detonation susceptibility to the higher back pressure to see what's going on there. Trying to collect parts for my junk. I'm looking at push rods and t-shirts. Gen 3 Hemi. Even a 6-liter with a 706 head is not going to be that high a compression. Not going to be 12 to 1. And it's not going to make anywhere near 700 horsepower if that's what you were talking about. LQ4 6-liter mother thumper cam forged piston. Do the forged pistons have valve reliefs in them? Best cylinder head for budget power. The best budget thing would be probably factory rec port heads if you can find some inexpensive takeoffs from somebody. Should I start building a 6-liter, upgrade my 4.8, and then transfer the parts to the 6-liter when I switch it? Well, the 6-liter is going to make more power. Don't put money into the motor that you're not going to build. Any semi-affordable 1,200-pound injectors on the market? I don't think so. Steve, ring gap is always a good idea. Do you think having 2.5-inch exhaust to turbo manifold is causing back pressure? I have each header running to the turbo manifold and join right at the turbo. You think there are some back pressure issues? Yeah, I would monitor it and see what's going on. I mean, is it? I can't remember now. Is this a twin turbo? This is a single turbo, right? So you have a Y going there. I mean, we've done 1,000 horsepower with 2.5-inch Y pipes, but our 2.5-inch Y pipe merges into a 3-inch V band, and then we V band flange and adapter that to the T4. Danny, you're here just in time for me to leave. It's okay though. Make sure everybody go check out richholderperformance.com. Also show love to the guys at Brown Tully Racing and Airflow Research and Vortec, Scat, and Race Tech. Single 1,000 wheel horsepower crank. We've done 1,000 horsepower flywheel stuff. I'd have to go look and see what I don't know what the most power we've made with this single turbo setup, but I know, and we're just using truck manifolds, feeding a 2.5 inch custom Y pipe that we did. I know that it will go way past where we are. I mean, I don't see any problem why it wouldn't go into 1,500 horsepower range. I calculated compression dish, flat, and 15 cc dome. All were 11 from what I saw. Let's do it together. I don't have to do it together. I already know. I've done lots of 6-liter stuff. It's not 12-1. I say that I'm going to go there now and test it, and it's going to be 12-1. Thanks for entertaining our questions. Happy to help. I will be back tonight. If you have not, go. What about the downpipe? I have opening up from 3 to 4. Yeah, a 4-inch should be enough. I don't know what the exit of that turbo is, but we cone the thing out immediately after the exit and then run the bigger pipe. Yeah, Shane, the 3.62 is the right stroke. Okay, let's help Shane out. Let's go to Wallace Racing. Wallace Racing compression calculator. Okay. We have 8 cylinders. We'll put a 4030 bore in there for you. Stroke 3.622. Chamber size. I'm assuming it's 62. Valve reliefs. We're going to put that there are none. We're going to put that it's a flat top. Gasket thickness. The stock one is 53. Gasket bore diameter is going to be 4. It's probably 4/100. We'll assume you're at 0 deck. It's probably not. 11.3 to 1. Almost like I knew what I was talking about. Yeah, 65 is going to make the compression even lower. $20 is that payment for knowing what the compression is, or is that just drinking money? Stock gasket is thinner. No, it's not. it's 53. You can put 41 in there. That's fine. You can put a 51 in there. You can put a 41 in there. You could change all that. It's not 12-1. It's not 12.3 to 1. My financial weekly. B15 LSX is the 88102, a good combination. What injector size you recommend? Drag and drive on E85. It's got to have big injectors in it. I don't know that you're going to get an intermediate one, but you're going to need 1,500 to 2,000s probably for that. The B15 is going to need to be upgraded to run that turbo on it. I would put head studs in it. You definitely need different springs. I put a different cam in it. Dinkin money. There we go. I do have some negative deck. Yeah, if you have negative deck, that means the piston's out of the hole, which is possible with an LS. It can be sometimes 4 or 5 thousandths out. You just got to measure that. My wife just got a Cricut. I'm going to attempt making custom gaskets. There you go. My wife uses a Cricut a lot. It works good. I've never done it. The bore size on the gasket, I don't know. You can vary that a lot. It depends on what gasket you're using. The ones that we run are about 4/100. So at 11-1, we can go 87 octane. Okay. Gonna run the same tune that I have with my GT45 on the GTX. It's probably going to be, I don't know what your tune is showing for the lower response rate. Like, do you have it tuned for 2000 and 1800 and all that for boost for that? If you do, that should be fine. Is there a video on how to calculate ring gap? You don't need a video on that. What you do is 6.5 thousandths per inch of bore. So multiply the bore size times 0.0065, and that's what your gap should be. The Tuffy's Garage, the specs for the G42 are up on the store. I said 89 octane, not 87. Okay. Okay, do whatever you want. You don't have to listen. I don't know why you want that compression on and you're trying to run cheap gas in it. I don't understand that. Yeah, 4 times 0.065. That's it. That would be for a 4-inch bore. What size wastegate would you use for best boost control and no boost creep? When we're running stuff on the engine dyno, we run 245s on it. But if I was running a single, I'd probably do a 60. We have more of a problem controlling boost on the engine dyno than you do out on the street or at the track. It's usually less problematic there. If you're having trouble and if you're putting boost to the top of the gate, that's certainly an indication that you're having a back pressure problem. Because like if you don't have spring pressure plus boost for control, you probably have a lot of back pressure. What size is the spring that you have in there? You're doing so much I can't keep up. I want to answer you about the twin scroll. What did you want to answer me about on a twin scroll? Were you talking about from another? We're talking about from another live feed. You want to run it on the street? Yeah, the higher the compression and the lower the octane, the less timing you're going to be able to run. So you're going to have to balance all three of those things. And then you're going to have to decide are you trying to get good fuel mileage or what is it you're trying to do? Yeah, Sean, the poll's already gone. I was going to leave 6 minutes ago. But I'm curious about the twin scroll comment. This is a whole lot easier to understand than the old school book by DATAdvisor that I read decades ago and tried to read and compare compressor maps. Compressor maps I like compressor maps. The problem with a compressor map is only telling you half of it. And also with a compressor map, to do it correctly, you have to know what your NA power output is. Some guys don't know that. It's all CO2. I have 244 millimeter Summit gates, only 5 PSI 5.8 springs on the gates. It made 523. Yeah, I think part of the problem that we get into is guys want like lots of dynamic range, so they have small springs in it like you do. And if you're going to try to control that with high back pressure, you need more spring pressure. You need more wastegate spring pressure. I like twin scroll turbos. Catch everyone tonight. Yep. Streetability and reliability. Yeah, maybe if you soften the chambers, that maybe you'd be able to get away with. I'm gonna be doing something on that, which should be interesting. I'm not giving you a hard time. I just don't know why people are wanting to run that high of compression on pump gas. They don't really go together. And you can do that if you put lots of camshaft in it. Like you put a big camshaft in it and get rid and lower the dynamic compression. A lot of times you can get away with more, but otherwise it's just you just narrow your tuning window so much that you got no wiggle room there. And honestly, I don't know what you're going to get out of that by, like, it'd be interesting to see as you go up in compression. Now I got to take away timing. Like what is the net gain now because of the detonation susceptibility on that octane? So I don't know if there's even a net gain there. It'd be, you'd have to data log a whole bunch of stuff to find out, but it would be kind of interesting. 85 does make life easier. That's right. In your opinion, what's the best 455? It would be any one that I have would be good. And on that note, it is time to go. But the good news is that I will be back tonight. I'm going to be working hard on the single-sided turbo, which is really was super cool, especially because we got to test the 2 different exhaust hot side things, which was very, very cool. I will see you guys all later.